So what we're going to do is go over the whole V-Ray thing again, and then if you guys have computers at home, you can render these at home. Okay, you get V-Ray for free. So let me show you that so it's recorded, because I know people can't retain more than 10% of what I say. So if you go to if you do a search for Chaos Group, these guys are Bulgarian. They made V-Ray, so maybe Chaos Group translates better um, in Bulgarian. I think they're Bulgarian. Hope it's. Yeah, I think they're. Yeah, from Sofia. Okay. What you need to do is you need to make an account. So you're going to register and make using your .edu account. Okay. So if you use your .edu, it knows you're logging in as a associated with the university. And then if you get into our account, and then if you go to download, you're going to look for V-Ray Rhino. Did not stick. Let's just try. Okay, there we go. So we're going to go to downloads, V-Ray Rhino. And then what they're going to give you for free is Rhino Academic. Okay? The only backside or the downside is it runs on 32-bit Rhino. Now, when you load Rhino on your computer, it will typically load 32-bit and 64-bit simultaneously. Okay, so if I go to my machine, in this case I'm using Windows 8, and I do a search for Rhino, you'll see Rhino 64-bit come up, and then just Rhino 5. So Rhino 5 is the 32-bit. Okay? This makes sense? So you're going to download this and load it. And then if I run, I am running now. I'm running Rhino 32-bit. You see where it says there? 32-bit? I know it's in here because I can see it already. But sometimes you got to switch it. So you need to go to render, current render, and switch it to V-Ray for Rhino. The key with using this is it's going to be a little bit of the older version. That it won't look as perfect, as good as the new version of Rhino for 64-bit. But it's free and it'll let you render high res. Okay? This makes sense? So at home you can do this as long as you load Rhino. And again, download the demo version. Even if you're using it just to render, you're opening the file and you're not saving it. You know. So we want to switch it to V-Ray. So after we do that, we can start setting up V-Ray. So if we go to V-Ray, V-Ray options, you're going to get this dialog box. It's going to look a little bit different than what's in the lab here. There's really nothing we need to authorize, but there's some things that we need to take a look at. The most important thing is indirect illumination. So under indirect illumination, this is global illumination. We want to make sure this is on. Okay? Global illumination is on, GI. The other thing we want to go to is environment. We want to turn both the GI skylight and the background. The skylight produces the sky for the global illumination, so we don't even need a light source. It has its own light source. M, we then click on M. M is the material, and we want to pick sky, and just leave everything default. Hit apply. So it goes from a little m to a big M. And then we want to do the same for the background. For type, we're going to use sky. And hit apply. Okay? After that, we're going to go to camera. So we're starting from the bottom up. Indirect illumination on, environment both on. Camera, we want to turn on physical camera. And eventually we're going to have to mess with the shutter, the ISO. This will be the easiest to sort of adjust because we can turn the ISO, different ISOs. This is what we need to change right now. Ultimately, we then need to change the output. So we then override the output, and then we're going to tell what the pixel count is here, okay? Makes sense so far? So I can test this. So I can render this. Let's see what's happening here. Hold on. Let's do that again. Not sure why it's. I might make a few other changes before we do this. Let's go back to V-Ray options. Under the GI here, we have two types of possibilities. I'm going to switch this to this bottom one to light cache, right? Light cache. It's going to go faster. So I think it's just really, really, really bright. You can start to see our object there. Okay, so it's way too bright. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go to my camera first and change. You can also change the shutter speed, but let's just go ahead and put this to ISO 50. Starting to see it now. So we're probably going to have to then change the shutter speed. Let's change it to 10. Should, hold on. Went the wrong way. So that's at 100. So now we're starting to get more what it probably really looks like. So it's what it's doing is taking the globe, it's taking the skylight, it's bouncing around, it's creating this light, this sort of soft lighting through this. And then these are two sort of processes that it will run through. The two squares, mine's a dual core, so you get two. Most computers now have a lot more. So you might get 8 cores. Probably too dark, obviously. Do you have a light in here? No. Just the way it's. Did you apply material to it, the V-Ray?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
I think I have material saved.
It's going to get brighter. So we'll take a look at the material too and see what type of material it is. So you can see it's really throwing a lot of light onto the ground. So we can probably tweak this a little bit. Okay, so let's say that's working for now. Alright, so this is the basic settings to get this thing to start rendering the way we might want it. Okay. The next thing is materials. So I'm just going to close this right now. We're going to go to V-Ray and go to Material Editor. Let's see what we have. You have a default. Okay. So in the scene when you do this, this will give you the preview. This is the default. If we want to make a new one, we just come here and we right click and say add material. And then we can say a V-Ray material. Then I can right click and say rename. We're going to do a razzle dazzle. Sorry. Razzle dazzle. And for the diffuse here for M, we can pick bitmap. So this is where you guys maybe were having some issues. So I'm using bitmap. You guys see that? And then there's file. Do you have some textures here? So these are pretty. So let's use.
Those have borders though, so they tend to leave that white line.
Okay, let's use this one then. Okay. So we'll apply that for now. So that's what that looks like. Hit apply. That's what that starts to look on that. And then what I want to do is select all the surfaces. Go to Razzle Dazzle, right click and say apply material to objects. Okay. Then what I can do is come here and set this to even render, and we'll start to see it. I can then re-render this and then see what this starts to look like. Oh, I don't know why that came in so close. Hold on. Had time to get coffee, huh? Now it starts looking. Here, let me pause this real quick. While that's so you know, after rendering this, you know, we get this look, and that's where it would have looked like. What we're going to do now is how do we control how this thing maps? Okay, so we can select all the geometry, and then if we go to properties, we have some options here. We have object, we have material. These are the actual material properties, and it's by object. But then we have texture mapping. So texture mapping is how does it get mapped? Okay. How is it mapping on our piece? Right now, it's basically doing it by surface, by default. So it's applied by surface. So if I click on apply surface mapping, it's basically doing it by surface. So it's a little hard, you know, I'll re-render it, but what we can start to see is it takes the piece and tries to get it to go into the surface. So the edge is then really emphasized, right? The paint, you know, because the material is sort of running this way and it's running that way. It's squishing to a corner. So it's following the surface parameters, okay? So what it's doing, it's taking something that's flat some type of pattern, and then say you have some form, you know, it's taking it and then making it fit on that surface, stretching it, and so forth. Does that make sense? So you guys are going to do one thing, which is going to be the surface mapping, which is default. You don't have to do anything. But then we can go like the spherical mapping, where it maps the entire piece. So I click on spherical. Do it again. Select everything. What it's doing is center a sphere. Then we can like apply it to where it maps it spherically about this thing. We can also apply it as a box. So we're creating like the box. So we're telling it like in the sphere. And then if we look at this, the mapping looks quite different. If I re-render it, it starts to go sort of around the entire piece. So this image is no longer really fully dependent on sort of the edge conditions, dependent on this mapping. Okay. Now there's other things we can do. So these are, some tests that I want you guys to do with your surface material. My computer's a little slow, as you can see, but you can see how it's mapping it with spherical, right? Sort of going like a sphere. Now another thing we can do is select all of these, put it back on surface mapping, and then we can go to the actual material. Here, go on the material, and then what we can do is start to manipulate how it's mapping there. That's the file we're using. We can start to manipulate if it's going to be to the material, if it's going to be an environment, and if it's going to be like a spherical environment. So if we apply, we can start manipulating the actual material itself. You can see now it's really big, right? So we have this UVW map that tells it how to apply, but then we also have in the material editor, we're telling it how to sort of, if it's going to be a texture. Texture is perfectly where you obviously want to be, and it wants to be explicit to where it's going. But then we can also repeat it or change the sort of scale of it. So it gets smaller. So now we're putting more, we're condensing the shape. So we're not just taking this cube and stretching it, we're taking a smaller cube or a smaller swatch and repeating it. So that's why we get these sort of waves. Or you see the lines there? This edge there we're starting to see. Well, we can get a little bit, we can treat the material a little bit different and create more, abstract that and create more of a grain pattern. Which is one that's, really starts to emphasize potentially the edge, right? The edge condition versus sort of camouflaging the edge. So when we do a map that's more spherical or a box, right, we have that technique, but if we take something else, we can see the mapping in this case. What can we apply? This is the, yeah, custom mapping, planar. You can do a cylinder. And a lot of times you want to do this like in a view, right? Like a top view. So you can see now how it's a cylinder. Similar to the sphere. Guess we're really zoomed in on that, sorry. So now it's not so much about emphasizing the edge, right? Because it's sort of wrapping the edge. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah? Now, ultimately, what we want to do is get these patterns onto our unrolled surfaces, which will be another challenge we'll talk about. So what I want you guys to do today is to sort of do this, right? So you guys have tweaked your geometries, right? You've built this thing, you tweaked it, you're supposed to render. We're going to have two views, right? But I'd like you guys to focus on one exterior view. And then I think with this, this is Nolan's. I think you can work on it. I was thinking that we stick with Razzle Dazzle. The reason why is as a sort of surface condition, as we talked about, it was always meant to sort of confuse. Sorry, I don't know why it's taking so long. Alright, guys? You can see what's happening now with that, acts a little bit different. Especially as we scale down the geometry now. So work on that. I think then is, how many people don't have Rhino at home? Do you have a computer at home? No, you don't. You can download Rhino for free. And you can download the V-Ray now I showed you, the demo version, which we can render at full res, okay? So there's no reason why you can't render these at higher quality. The render engine actually on here, on the lab computers is better, but we can't render it at high resolution. Because I like to print one today, okay? So I'm gonna work on mine and print one. I'm also gonna upload the people, so you can put some figures in there. Okay, so 3D people, and then we'll go from there.